So I'm Danielle Jackson, and my thesis is Ralph Lemon's Cool American Epic. In 2004, conceptualist Ralph Lemon assembled an all-black cast to aid in the construction of a 90-minute theatrical performance entitled Come Home, Charlie Patton, which premiered at the Kreiner Center for Performing Arts in Urbana, Illinois. It was the final installment in Lemon's Geography trilogy, a 10-year project that examined the evolution of culture, identity, and race in the locales of West Africa, Asia, and the United States. Set primarily in the American South, the performance investigates socially charged sites significant to racial protests in Black Americans. It is comprised of an elaborate set design that includes sculptural elements, a video projection screen, and auditorium seating. The theatrical stage is further illuminated by expressive choreography. There are often two or more dancers on stage performing periodic movements that appear like questions and responses, cultivating a dialogue between bodies. Ralph Lemon, who began his career in literature and theater, thought of the performance as an attempt to create the great Black American epic that had yet to be written, posing the questions: when is a culture allowed to be mythologized, and has the 400-year Black experience in America earned that right? The epic, a lone poetic narrative that recounts the heroic journey of a single person, group, or culture, exists largely within the realm of literature. We know its form well through the ancient Sumerian epic of Gilgamesh or Homer's The Odyssey. However, mythology as exhibited in the form of the epic sheds light on and allows us to rethink historical moments. But what happens when the epic is translated from the page of a book into performance? What if we look at the function of an epic in an interdisciplinary way? Through iconography and gestures in contemporary art, or through the movement of Black bodies throughout history, time, and space? Called from Intersecting Histories, this presentation argues that Come Home, Charlie Patton is an epic that highlights what I call the cool cultural history of Black Americans. At its most basic level, the phrase asserts that the cultural history of Black Americans is cool, but more importantly, it speaks to the way Black subjects have had to move, navigate, and transcend while existing within the American landscape. And in this way, Ralph Lemon's epic becomes a cool American epic. The setting is vast, jumps in time, and is nonlinear like the slippery guise of cool itself. Its nonlinear narrative places emphasis on the main protagonist of the epic and mimics the structure of human memory. Like Lemon's epic, this presentation will take on those qualities. As with any great epic, we have a hero. He is Elias Clayton, and his story begins on the night of June 15, 1920. He was one of the 3 Black circus workers lynched by a white mob and hung from a streetlight post on the corner of 2nd Avenue and 1st Street in Duluth, Minnesota. His lifeless body was freed from constraints and strategically placed on the ground, with his head lying next to the foot of a grinning man and below the 2 other victims. Against a backdrop of radiant light, the white mob looks emphatically at the camera, leaning their heads forward to be within the picture. The photograph bolsters the rhetoric of white supremacy and underscores the lynching spectacle, an epidemic that plagued the United States from the mid-1800s to the late 1960s. It is a matter of historical fact that Elias Clayton lost his life during this period, but because of the epic's relationship to the supernatural, he finds reincarnation. Elias Clayton becomes Elias, our main protagonist, who is inspired by the activism of James Baldwin and begins to visit places where bad things have happened. After these visits, he performs counter memorials, which are rituals intended to commemorate sites connected to racial violence and protests. His counter memorials range from Elias stretching his body laterally across the pavement to attempting to dance as the blast of a high-pressure fire hose attacks his body, like the ritual you see here. In the moments prior to this action, a narrator on stage explains that Elias is arrested in the present-day site of Duluth, Minnesota, performing a counter memorial in the site of his own violent death. But when he returned home, after spending a few days in the county jail, he made this dance. In the clip, we see Elias in the final 5-minute scene of Come Home, Charlie Patton, entitled Elias Got Into Trouble. He stands in front of a sheeny rippled theatrical curtain, wearing a vibrantly red jacket. We see that a high-pressure fire hose attacks his body, and the water pours off of it like a cascade. An identifiable element in Lemon's epic is the fire hose. It takes its historical point of departure from a moment in 1963, where Birmingham, Alabama Public Safety Commissioner Eugene Bull Connor ordered firemen and policemen under his command to turn high-pressure fire hoses onto peaceful demonstrators at bone-chillingly cold temperatures. It has long been noted by scholars such as Martin Berger that white audiences viewed images of nonviolent protesters as enactments of passivity, highlighting a rhetoric of white agency and black victimization. However, I contend that Moore's image documents a line of seated demonstrators who are engaged in what Susan Lee Foster calls choreographies of protest, where each moment of human movement can be understood as a product of choices, selected and invented. Thus, these images are active and represent elements of Black cool. The gestures here represent calculated acts of civil disobedience, acts often met with a high degree of violence. Their choreography highlights the willingness of demonstrators to put their bodies on the line by aligning themselves with protest campaigns. And it represents one of the historical moments that Ralph Lemon evokes in his performance. Due to the dissemination and reception of these images by the American public, fire hose images have come to be treated as evidence of the Black American experience, historicizing the choreography, violence, and agency they depict. And undoubtedly, civil rights, through time, has developed its own lexicon of iconography. Iconography that is often appropriated, altered, and re-envisioned. It is acquired strength so formidable that the fire hose has become a familiar trope in contemporary art. Lemon's strategy departs from object-based abstraction, and fire hose reenactments, like Dred Scott's recent performance on the impossibility of freedom that took place under the Manhattan Bridge. Scott, who is most famously known for desecrating an American flag, sought to comment on the controversy surrounding the death of Ferguson, Missouri teenager Michael Brown, who was shot and killed by a white police officer in August 2014, a gesture that becomes clear when you notice his hand in the don't shoot position. Scott hires a white fireman to assist in staging scenes that mimic existing canonical civil rights photographs. The method of strict replication imprisons the narrative of Black movement within the Black-white binary and trivializes the complexity of the Black American experience in its choreography, offering a limited view of Black cool. Comparatively, Lemon's approach is transgressive, exposing that the Black American experience has its own mise-en-scène that includes but reaches beyond civil rights imagery. It occupies another productive space, the space of the epic, one that capitalizes on the duality between real and artifice, opening up possibilities for rethinking familiar historical narratives and elements of Black cool by crafting a figure who is essentially the embodiment of the Black American experience. The cool cultural history of Black Americans, as exhibited by Elias, is fueled by movement and cannot be separated from transcendence. This is made undeniably visible in Lemon's performance due to a more comprehensive convergence of Black cultural narratives and a lengthier timeline of events. If we return to the video of Elias, you'll notice in the very beginning of the clip, before the water is unleashed, Lemon enacts a buck dance, a dance created during the era of slavery that is percussive, rhythmic, and largely weighted down in the foot. Today, the buck dance is viewed as an ancestor of tap dance and is a key element in most Black social dances, according to dance scholar Thomas D. Franz. but it is largely associated with the painful history of minstrelsy, an American form of entertainment developed in the 19th century, consisting of comedy, dancing, and music performed by white performers in blackface. In the final scene of the epic, the fire hose from Civil Rights meets the buck dance with all its layered complexity and is confronted by a resurrected lynch figure. Elias's counter memorial uses the fire hose to destroy the buck dance and metaphorically the negative associations it carries with it. Elias is meant to symbolize the choreography of Black Americans, the way Black subjects navigate and transcend. The water forces Lemon to collapse, slip, and adjust his movements. And though he tries, he can't maintain the buck dance, but he weathers the pressure, keeping cool. Ralph Lemon states, with the fire hose buck, I found a balance between this violent outside force and my body trying to maintain equilibrium. For me, the eloquence of that struggle, the determination to keep going without loss of dignity, to transcend the horror, really sums up the Black American experience. Our main protagonist, Elias, is an everyman. He is reborn and rebelliously sets out on a journey to enact counter memorials at sites significant to racial protest, even the site of his own death. Elias's actions are similar to the cool choreography of civil rights demonstrators, but also to the cool choreographies of Black Americans at large. A viewer can locate the history of civil rights, minstrelsy, lynching, Black social dances, and many more within the body of Elias. This plurality of experiences, as presented in the transgressive structure of Lemon's epic, disrupts linear and dominant narratives of Black victimization and violence, narratives that are reinforced by works such as Scott's On the Impossibility of Freedom. The exhaustive rethinking in Ralph Lemon's cool American epic provides a window through which scholars can arrive at new understandings of Black cool, extending beyond its traditional associations with the smooth polyrhythmic sounds of jazz and the bombastic idiosyncratic pulsations of hip-hop. Come Home, Charlie Patton is a resounding epic exposing the cool cultural history of Black Americans, a cool that is linked to the way Black subjects move through the American landscape, a journey that undeniably renders transcendence visible. Thank you.